Hi, welcome back to Bite-Sized Server Components. Today, we'll be talking about why server components are useful for your applications. And in episode 3, we'll look at the origins of server components and data fetching in React. In episode 1, we saw how server components are just components that return a description of a client component tree. To see how that's useful, consider a component like this with a disjoint set of children components. Typically, all of these components would end up bundled together, even though we only need one at a time. We could try to address this with React Lazy or framework-specific APIs like Next Dynamic. However, that has some issues. For starters, we'd have to know that there's an issue. We'd have to know what to look for, then we have to go find and update it. But there's an even bigger problem here. React Lazy just doesn't compose. If any of our lazy components also have lazy components of their own, then we run into a waterfall. The client first has to fetch the dynamic component and re-render the tree, only to discover that it's missing another dynamic component. So it'll go and fetch that and then render again, and so on. In fact, we'll run into the exact same issue if we try to do data fetching from our client components too. Server components solve this for us entirely. By using server components, everything gets contained within one logical module graph that spans the server and client. This gives our bundler enough context to package our components into the smallest number of bundles necessary. And when our server component runs, it knows exactly which components were used. This means it can send the browser only what it needs, just before it needs it. No more waterfalls. But that's not all. Another feature that server components enables is streaming. Consider this video page component. Here, we have a tree of server components that eventually render to client components. When our video page server component renders, it returns a description of a client component tree that has a few holes in it for the components that aren't ready yet. This can be transferred to the browser. Later, when the video server component renders, the corresponding hole in the client component tree can be filled, so the client can display the video and start loading code for it. And when the comments load a little later, we can do the same there. Perhaps most excitingly, this doesn't require any significant amount of JavaScript to have been loaded by the browser. Instead, React will server render the client component tree as usual. When more HTML is available, it'll emit a tiny inline script element to move it into the right place in the DOM. Server components make it trivial to build an application that provides a great user experience. Next time, we'll see how we got here by taking a look at some of the other approaches that were tried before server components. Thanks for watching. See you next time.